There is a specific coordinate in the East China Sea where the silence feels heavier than the water itself. For decades, it was a place where history simply stopped, a graveyard with no markers, only oil slicks and memories. They say you cannot hide a mountain, yet one nation tried. They built a ghost out of 65,000 tons of hardened steel. It was a fortress designed to carry the soul of an empire, a weapon so terrifyingly powerful that its very existence was a state secret. It was the unsinkable castle that promised to rule the waves forever. But the ocean does not care about promises. Behind the wall of secrecy lay a darker reality. This is not just a story about big guns or thick armor. It is a story about pride, about a floating city of 3,000 men who were trapped in a paradox, sailing on a ship too expensive to risk, yet too legendary to surrender. It is the story of a dream that turned into a one-way ticket. Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of the myth. We will walk the teak decks where the band played while the world burned. We will sit in the command center, where the impossible orders were given. And we will follow the wake of the giant to its final, fiery resting place. So settle into your chair. The journey is long and the water is deep. Welcome to the lost story of the Yamato. The ocean keeps its secrets well. It is a vast, indifferent archive, swallowing steel and bone with equal efficiency, burying ambition under miles of crushing black water. But some secrets are too heavy to stay buried. Some stories drift up from the silt, carried on the currents of history, demanding to be told not as they were recorded in the dry ledgers of war, but as they were felt. This is the story of a ghost made of 65,000 tons of hardened steel. A ghost that carried 2,500 men into a fire so intense it boiled the sea. This is the story of the Yamato. To understand the end, the smoke, the screaming, the oil-slicked water of 1945, we cannot start with the death. We must start with the dream. We must go back to a time when the world was still pretending to be at peace, but the forges were already burning red in the night. We must go back to a Japan that felt cornered, humiliated, and desperate to prove that it belonged at the table of giants. It begins in the 1930s. The Great War is over, but the peace is fragile. The world powers, Britain, the United States, Japan, have signed treaties, papers meant to limit the size of navies. They call it arms control. Japan calls it a chokehold. The treaties say that for every 5 battleships Britain or America builds, Japan can only build 3. They are told, in the polite language of diplomacy, that they are a second-rate power, that they are lesser. In the halls of Tokyo, this arithmetic is unacceptable. The atmosphere is thick with cigar smoke and wounded pride. The admirals look at the map of the Pacific. It is too big. The American industrial machine is too fast. If war comes, Japan cannot win a race of numbers. They cannot build more ships than the West. So, a quiet, dangerous idea takes root. If they cannot build more, they will build bigger. They will build a single vessel so terrifyingly powerful that it renders the numbers irrelevant. They imagine a fortress that can outgun anything it catches and outrun anything it cannot kill. They do not just want a warship. They want a symbol. They want a physical manifestation of the emperor's will, cast in iron. They name it before the first rivet is driven. Yamato, the ancient poetic name for Japan itself. It is not just a title, it is a statement. To sink this ship would be to sink the nation. But how do you hide a mountain? The year is 1937. The location is the Kure Naval Arsenal, a sprawling industrial complex tucked into the coastline of the inland sea. It is a city of soot and steam where the sky is permanently bruised by the exhaust of smokestacks. Here the deception begins. The architects know that if the Americans or the British learn the true scale of what is being planned, they will escalate. The Yamato must be born in the shadows. The budget is the first lie. The cost of the ship is astronomical, enough to bankrupt a small country. To hide it, the funding is broken into fragments, scattered across hundreds of boring, bureaucratic line items in the national budget. Air bridge repair here, a civilian harbour expansion there, a railway upgrade in the north. The money flows like water through cracked earth, disappearing from public view, only to pool in the secret accounts of the Navy. Then, there is the physical secrecy. At Kure, the dry dock is deepened. It is a canyon carved into the earth. But deep is not enough. The ship will be taller than an apartment block. Workers are ordered to build fences, not just fences, but walls of galvanized steel and timber, rising high enough to block the view from the sea. They weave massive mats of sisal rope, thousands of them, and hang them like curtains around the slipway. The town of Kure becomes a fortress of paranoia. The military police, the Kempeitai, swarm the streets. They are watching the windows. On the hills overlooking the harbor, citizens are forbidden from looking down. If you stop on the roadside to tie your shoe while facing the dockyard, you might disappear into an interrogation room. The train line that runs along the coast offers a brief glimpse of the shipyard. It is a risk the Navy cannot take. So they institute a new rule. When the passenger trains pass the Kure yards, the blinds must be drawn. Guards walk the aisles, truncheons in hand, ensuring that every citizen sits in darkness until the secret is passed. Inside the yard, the secrecy turns inward. The blueprints are never assembled in one place. One engineer designs a boiler, another designs a rudder, another designs a gun turret. They are given pieces of a puzzle, but never the picture on the box. They work in isolation, driven by a duty they are not allowed to discuss with their wives. Even the rivets are a secret, millions of them. The hammering is a constant, rhythmic thunder that echoes off the hills, day and night. The city of Kure sleeps to the sound of metal striking metal, a heartbeat of industry that never slows. The people know something is happening. They can feel the vibration in the pavement. They can smell the ozone of the welders' torches, but they do not ask. In 1937, to ask is to invite treason. As the hull takes shape, it becomes clear that this is not just a ship. It is a geography. It is over 800 feet long. It is wider than any battleship ever conceived. The steel plating on the hull is 16 inches thick, hardened armor designed to shatter the heaviest shells the enemy possesses. But the true soul of the Yamato, the reason for its existence, lies in the guns. Chapter 3. Steel versus Time. The logic of the battleship is simple. Reach out and touch the enemy before he can touch you. For Yamato, the architects demand the impossible. They want guns with a caliber of 46 centimeters, 18.1 inches. To the uninitiated, numbers are abstract, but in the world of ballistics, this is a leap into the unknown. No navy has ever mounted guns this size on a moving platform. A single shell weighs 3,200 pounds. Imagine a small car, made of solid steel and high explosives, fired over a distance of 26 miles. The engineering challenge is a nightmare. To fire such a shell requires an explosion of catastrophic force. The pressure inside the gun barrel is enough to turn steel into liquid. The initial tests are disastrous. Barrels crack. Breech mechanisms fail. The metallurgists are pushed to their limit, mixing new alloys, cooling the steel in oil baths, X-raying every inch for microscopic flaws. And then there is the blast pressure. When these guns fire, the shockwave alone is a weapon. It is calculated that any human being standing on the deck, unprotected, within 50 yards of the muzzle, would be stunned, their eardrums ruptured, their skin flayed by the compression of the air. Because of this, nothing on the deck can be fragile. The anti-aircraft guns, the searchlights, the lifeboats, everything must be shielded or encased. The ship is fighting its own weaponry, and as the guns grow heavier, the ship sinks deeper. Weight is the enemy of speed. The designers are trapped in a vicious cycle. They add armor to protect the magazines. The ship gets heavier. They add bigger engines to push the weight. The engines need more space. They make the hull wider to create buoyancy. The water resistance increases. It is a delicate, agonizing ballet of physics. They strip weight where they can. They use electric welding instead of rivets in non-critical areas to save a few tons. They curve the bow into a bulbous shape to cut the water more cleanly. It is a masterpiece of hydrodynamics, hidden below the waterline where no one will ever see it. But while the engineers wrestle with steel, the world outside is changing. Time is moving faster than the shipyard. In Europe, war is brewing. In the Pacific, tensions are snapping. And in the skies, a new technology is maturing. Aircraft. Fragile canvas and wood constructions are evolving into aluminum killers. This brings us to Chapter 4. Doctrine set in stone. The Japanese Imperial Navy is a house divided, but the landlords are old men who dream of old wars. They were raised on the legend of Tsushima, the great battle of 1905, where the Japanese fleet destroyed the Russians in a single afternoon of gunfire. This victory is their religion. They believe, with absolute, unshakable conviction, in the decisive battle. They believe that any future war with America will be decided by a clash of battleships, two lines of steel giants hammering away at each other until one sinks. In this vision, Yamato is the king. It is the ultimate piece on the chessboard. But there are voices in the wilderness, younger officers, men who have watched the biplanes turn into monoplanes, who have seen the potential of the aircraft carrier. They look at the blueprints of Yamato and they see a dinosaur. They argue that a ship costing this much, consuming this much fuel, and requiring this much manpower is a liability. They point out that a torpedo dropped from a cheap airplane can sink a battleship just as effectively as a heavy shell. They say respectfully, hesitantly, "Admiral, the age of the gun is over." They are ignored. In the rigid hierarchy of the Imperial Navy, dissent is dangerous. It is seen as a lack of spirit. The battleship advocates hold the power, the budget, and the ear of the government. They argue that an airplane can never sink a maneuvering battleship. They argue that the Yamato's armor is impervious. They argue from pride, not physics. So the construction continues. The rivets are driven. The doubts are silenced. The doctrine is set in stone, and the ship is built to fight a war that exists only in the minds of the elderly. October 1940. The hull is ready to touch the water. Usually a ship launch is a national celebration. There should be brass bands, cheering crowds, newsreel cameras, and streamers of confetti. The launch of a capital ship is a moment to flex muscles for the world to see. But for Yamato, there is only silence. The launch is conducted in a surreal hush. The harbor is cleared. The police form a perimeter. The workers are the only witnesses. There is no shouting, just the creaking of the massive wooden blocks, the groan of the chains, and the immense displacement of water as the Leviathan slides backward into the bay. It floats. It is a mountain on the sea. The sheer vertical wall of its side is terrifying. But there are no speeches, no headlines. The next day, the newspapers talk of rice rationing and diplomatic cables. The Yamato is a phantom. For the crew, this secrecy is a burden. They are hand-picked men, the elite of the fleet. When they receive their transfer orders, they are not told the name of the ship. They are sent to Cura and ferried out to the waiting giant. When they climb the gangway, they are struck by the size. It feels less like a ship and more like a floating city. The corridors stretch for miles. The engine rooms are caverns of piping and heat, but they are also struck by the atmosphere. There is a sense of unease. They are told not to write home about the size of the guns. They are told to cover the equipment when other ships pass. They feel honored to be there. Yes, this is the pinnacle of their career, but they also feel isolated. They are guarding a secret that weighs as much as the steel itself. They begin their training. They run drills. They scrub the decks until the teak is white. They learn the maze of passageways, but they are always looking over their shoulder. The ship is commissioned in December 1941. Just days later, the world catches fire. On December 7th, the Japanese carrier fleet attacks Pearl Harbor. It is a stunning, devastating blow. But note the weapon used. It was not the battleship. It was the airplane, the very weapon the architects of Yamato dismissed. In a single morning, the Japanese Navy proves to the world that the battleship is obsolete. They sink the American battle line from the air. And yet, back in the inland sea, the Yamato sits at anchor, a monument to a strategic error. The irony is bitter. Japan has started a war with a new kind of violence, but they have bet their national treasure on the old kind. Chapter 6. The Weapon That Waited. The early years of the war are strange for the Yamato. While the Pacific burns, while destroyers and cruisers and carriers fight desperate, bloody skirmishes in the Solomon Islands and the Coral Sea, the Yamato moves cautiously. It is too valuable to risk. That is the paradox. It is the most powerful ship in the world, yet the High Command is terrified of scratching the paint. It becomes a headquarters ship. The Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Yamato brings his staff aboard. For the sailors, life on the Yamato is a surreal disconnect from the reality of the war. They call it Hotel Yamato. Compared to the squalid, sweating conditions of the smaller ships, Yamato is luxurious. It has air conditioning in certain quarters. It has huge galleys making soft white bread. It has ice cream machines. The officers dine on white tablecloths with silver service, while thousands of men are dying in the jungles of Guadalcanal. The ship moves between safe anchorages, Truk Lagoon, Kure, Brunei. It drops anchor. It sits. The men drill. They polish the guns that have never been fired in anger. The crew begins to feel a strange shame. They see the battered destroyers limp into the harbor, decks scarred by shrapnel, crews exhausted and traumatized. The destroyer sailors look at the pristine, massive Yamato with a mixture of awe and resentment. "There they are," they whisper. "The hotel." The Yamato sailors want to fight. They want to prove that this mountain of steel is not just a showpiece. They drill on the massive 46-centimeter guns. They practice loading the shells. The hydraulic rammers shove the explosives into the breech with a mechanical thump hiss. The turrets rotate with a low electric hum. But the order to engage never comes. The High Command is saving Yamato, saving it for the decisive battle. They are waiting for the moment when the American fleet lines up on the horizon, just like the Russians did in 1905. But the Americans are not playing by the script. They are skipping across the ocean, island by island, bringing their airfields with them. They are building carriers by the dozen. They are changing the geometry of war. The Yamato sits in the lagoon at Truk, a tiger in a cage. The tropical heat shimmers off the decks. The men stand at the railing, looking at the blue horizon, wondering when their turn will come. They do not know yet that the war has already passed them by. They do not know that they are guarding a dead idea, but the waiting cannot last forever. The American tide is rising. The perimeter is shrinking. Soon the safety of the lagoons will vanish. The hotel will have to close, and the beast will have to go out into the storm. As 1943 bleeds into 1944, the silence on the decks of the Yamato begins to feel heavy. It is the silence of a held breath, the silence before the fall. The grand ambition is over. The reality is about to begin. The dream of the 1930s, the dream of a ship that could carry a nation, is about to meet the cold, hard daylight of a losing war. This is where the myth ends and the tragedy begins. The steel is ready. The men are ready. But the ocean is waiting, and it does not care about their honor. It only cares about buoyancy. And soon, very soon, the laws of physics will be the only laws that matter. The steel skin of the Yamato is thick enough to stop a projectile moving faster than the speed of sound, but it cannot stop the heat. By 1944, the war has moved into the tropics, and the ship has become a cauldron. Step inside the hull, past the heavy blast doors, down the steep ladders, and you leave the open ocean behind. You enter a closed ecosystem, a floating city of 3,000 men. We often imagine these warships as sterile, grey machines. But the reality of life aboard the Yamato is organic, messy, and intensely crowded. While the officers enjoy the relative luxury that earned the ship its nickname Hotel Yamato, staterooms, polished wood, whiskey, the enlisted men live in a different world. Deep in the bowels of the ship, the air is heavy with the smell of 3,000 bodies, the metallic tang of lubricating oil, and the sweet, cloying scent of cooking rice. Ventilation is a constant struggle. In the tropical sun, the steel deck absorbs heat like a skillet. Below, the temperature climbs. Men work in fundoshi, loincloths, sweat slicking their skin as they tend to the massive boilers that power the turbines. At night, the crew quarters are a forest of canvas. Hammocks are slung in tiers, 4 or 5 high, swaying gently with the roll of the ocean. It is a hive of humanity. You sleep inches from your neighbor's face. You breathe his air. You know his nightmares. There is no privacy here. There is only the collective pulse of the crew. To maintain order in this pressure cooker, life is governed by a rigid, brutal discipline. The hierarchy is absolute. A petty officer can strike a sailor for a button undone, for a glance held too long. The spirit injection, a fist to the face, is common. It is a culture of physical correction designed to erase the individual. You are not a man, you are a component of the Yamato. Yet, despite the hardship, there is a fierce, desperate pride. They are the crew of the world's greatest ship. When they walk the streets of a port town, other sailors give them a wide berth. They wear the name Yamato on their cap ribbons like a badge of nobility. They believe the propaganda, that as long as Yamato floats, the empire cannot fall. But belief is a fragile shield against the changing sky. While the crew scrubs the decks and polishes the brass, the nature of their enemy is transforming. The Americans are no longer just fighting with ships. They are bringing a storm of aircraft, swarms of dive bombers and torpedo planes that move like angry wasps. To prepare, the Yamato must learn to fight the sky. Chapter 8. Learning to sink others. The training exercises in 1944 take on a frantic urgency. The Yamato is often joined by her sister, the Musashi. Seeing the two of them together is a sight that defies logic. Twin mountains, identical in silhouette, identical in power. Together they represent 140,000 tons of displacement. When they steam in formation, their wake creates a turbulent river that can capsize smaller boats. But the drills reveal a terrifying truth. The anti-aircraft guns scream at the target drones. The sky fills with black puffs of flak. The noise is deafening, a physical assault on the senses, but the tracking is too slow. The traverse mechanisms of the guns struggle to keep up with the speed of modern aircraft. The optical directors, men looking through binoculars, cannot calculate the lead angles fast enough. The gunners are training to swat flies with sledgehammers. And there is another problem. The main guns, those massive 46-centimeter giants, are designed to sink battleships on the horizon, not airplanes overhead. The engineers come up with a desperate innovation, the Sanshiki shell, the Type 3. It is an anti-aircraft shell for the main guns. Instead of solid steel, it is packed with hundreds of incendiary tubes. When fired, it explodes in a cone of fire, a giant shotgun blast meant to incinerate formations of planes. It looks spectacular, a wall of flame in the sky. But in practice, it damages the barrels. It blinds the ship's own optics with smoke, and it takes 30 seconds to reload. In 30 seconds, a dive bomber can drop its payload and be halfway back to the clouds. The crew senses the gap between the myth and the machine. They watch the nimble escort destroyers dancing around them, turning on a dime, while their own ship requires miles of ocean just to change course. They are riding a dinosaur, and the meteors are already falling. Then comes October, 1944. The Philippines. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. The Japanese High Command gambles everything on one massive, complex operation to stop the American invasion. It is the decisive battle they have waited for. The Yamato, the Musashi, and the rest of the fleet sail out to meet destiny. They are spotted. Chapter 9. The Death of Musashi. On October 24th, the American carriers find the fleet in the Sibuyan Sea. They ignore the smaller ships. They focus their rage on the giants. But the clouds dictate the tragedy. Yamato is partially obscured by a squall, hidden by the grey veil of rain. Musashi is exposed. Musashi is clear against the blue water. The attack is relentless. It is not a battle, it is an execution. Wave after wave of American planes descend. The air fills with the whine of engines and the roar of explosions. From the bridge of the Yamato, the officers watch their sister ship die. It is a slow, agonizing trauma. The Musashi is built to survive, and that is its curse. It absorbs punishment that would vaporize a lesser vessel. 1 torpedo, 3, 5, 10. The water around Musashi boils. The great ship begins to slow, it lists. The armor belt, the thickest ever made, is breached. The pumps fail. Yamato sails past. The crew lines the rail, staring across the water. They see the smoke billowing from Musashi's superstructure. They see the tiny figures of men jumping into the oil-slicked sea. 19 torpedoes, 17 bombs. That is what it takes to kill a giant. But it can be killed. When Musashi finally rolls over and slips beneath the surface, taking 1,000 men with her, something breaks in the heart of the Yamato crew. They are looking in a mirror. They have just watched their own future. The myth of invincibility is shattered. If Musashi, identical in every bolt and plate, can be sunk by air power, then Yamato is just a target waiting for its turn. Survivors from Musashi are pulled from the water. Later, some are transferred. They come aboard Yamato with haunted eyes. They do not speak of glory. They speak of the sound of the hull buckling. They speak of the water rising in the corridors. They are the ghosts of tomorrow, walking the decks of the living. But the battle is not over. Chapter 10. The Ship That Never Fired. The next day, off the island of Samar, Yamato finally stumbles into a surface fight. The main guns, silent for so long, are cleared for action. But the scenario is a nightmare of confusion. The Japanese Admiral Kurita thinks he has found the main American carrier fleet. In reality, he has stumbled upon a small, lightly defended escort unit. Taffy 3. Escort carriers and destroyers. Tin cans. It should be a massacre. Yamato weighs more than the entire American unit combined. The order is given. Fire. The ship shudders. The blast pressure from the 18-inch guns strips the paint from the deck. The sound is not heard. It is felt in the marrow of the bone. For the first time in history, 46-centimeter shells scream toward an enemy ship. But the battle is a chaos of smoke screens and rain squalls. The American destroyers, impossibly brave, charge the Japanese giants. They make smoke. They launch torpedoes. They fire their tiny 5-inch guns at the Yamato's bridge. The Japanese optics are blinded. The radar is primitive. The great guns of Yamato are trying to hit fleeing, maneuvering targets through a haze of confusion. They fire AP shells, armor-piercing, designed to punch through battleships. They pass clean through the thin skins of the American escort carriers without exploding, exiting the other side before the fuse can trigger. The mightiest weapon ever built is over-engineered for the fight at hand. In the chaos, Yamato turns away to avoid a torpedo spread. The turn takes her out of the fight for crucial minutes. The Admiral loses his nerve. He overestimates the enemy. He orders a withdrawal. The Yamato turns north. The guns fall silent. The crew is bewildered. They had the enemy in their sights. They had the power, but they are leaving. The result is a strategic failure. The American landing forces are safe. The Japanese Navy has spent its strength and gained nothing. Yamato returns to port scarred but afloat, but the shame is worse than the damage. They were the ultimate weapon, and they failed to turn the tide. The doctrine of the decisive battle has collapsed. The battleship did not save the empire. It merely survived it. Chapter 11. Waiting in the Shadow of Defeat. Winter, 1944. The war is effectively lost, though no one dares say it aloud. The Yamato retreats to the inland sea, back to the waters of its birth. But this is not the safe haven of before. The cities of Japan are burning. The American B-29s are turning Tokyo and Osaka into ash. The blockade is strangling the country. At the anchorage in Kure, the atmosphere is grim. The hotel is closed. Supplies are dwindling. The white rice is replaced by barley and fillers. The heating is turned off to save fuel. The ship sits cold and dark in the winter twilight. The younger sailors, the ones who were teenagers when the war started, can sense the end. They see the lack of aircraft cover. They see the empty fuel barges. The Grand Fleet has been reduced to a handful of cripples hiding in the coves. Rumors begin to circulate below decks, whispers in the hammock rows. Why are we still here? Why are they saving us? Some say the Yamato will be turned into a floating battery, beached on the coast to act as a fortress. Others say they are negotiating a surrender, but the veterans shake their heads. They know the code of the Imperial Navy. There is no surrender, there is only death. The waiting is psychological torture. Every air raid siren sends the crew to battle stations. They stand by the guns, scanning the sky, waiting for the inevitable. They watch the horizon, knowing that the American carriers are creeping closer. Then, in late March 1945, the Americans invade Okinawa. This is the doorstep of Japan, the final barrier. The urgency in Tokyo reaches a fever pitch. The Emperor asks a simple, devastating question. What is the Navy doing? That question seals the fate of the Yamato. The honor of the Navy is at stake. They cannot let the Americans take Okinawa while the world's greatest battleship sits idle in a harbor. It must be used. It must be thrown into the fire, regardless of the outcome. Chapter 12. Operation Without Return. April 5, 1945. A conference room on the flagship. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and fatalism. The mission is outlined. It is named Tengo, the Heavenly Operation. The plan is madness. The Yamato, accompanied by a light cruiser and 8 destroyers, will sail to Okinawa. They will fight their way through the American fleet. They will beach the ship on the coast of Okinawa. The massive guns will then be used as artillery to support the defending troops. And when the shells run out, the crew will charge ashore with rifles and swords to die fighting on the sand. The officers listening to this plan are stunned. There is no air cover. The Japanese Air Force has nothing left to give. Without planes to protect them, Yamato will be a naked target for thousands of American aircraft. One officer stands up. He argues that this is not a battle, it is a waste of human life. "Let us be used effectively," he pleads. The Chief of Staff looks at him and speaks the cold truth. "This is not about success, it is about how we die. If the Yamato survives the war without fighting, it will be a shame upon the Navy forever. We must offer this flower of our nation as a sacrifice." It is decided. The ship is not going to fight. It is going to die. The logistics confirm the suicide nature of the mission. The fuel depots are scraped dry. There is not enough oil in the entire district to fill Yamato's massive tanks. They manage to scavenge enough fuel for the trip to Okinawa, but not for the return. The order is passed down. Surface Special Attack Force. The phrase special attack is the polite euphemism for suicide. It is the same term used for the kamikaze pilots. On the evening of April 5th, the final preparations are made. The sick are offloaded. The cadets, the youngest midshipmen who are the future of the Navy, are ordered to leave the ship. They protest, weeping, begging to stay with their comrades. They are forcibly removed. The Navy wants to save the seed corn, even as it burns the harvest. And then, the most chilling order of all. No lifeboats. The wooden launches, the combustible materials, anything that might catch fire is stripped from the decks and left on the pier. The message is clear to every man on board. You will not be needing a boat. You will not be coming back. That night a farewell party is held in the wardroom. They drink sake, they sing Navy songs, but the laughter is brittle. The faces are pale. They are ghosts drinking to their own memory. Below decks, the sailors write letters. They cut locks of hair and fingernails to leave behind in small wooden boxes, pieces of themselves for their families to bury, since there will be no bodies. They write to their mothers, "Do not weep for me, I go to fulfill my duty." They use the standard patriotic phrases, but in the shaky handwriting, you can see the fear. They are boys, 19, 20 years old. They are about to walk into a furnace. The sun rises on April 6th. The mist clears. The Yamato weighs anchor. The great chains rattle up through the hawse pipes for the last time. The engines rumble to life, a deep vibration that shakes the hull. The ship turns toward the harbor mouth. On the shore, people stop to watch. They see the silhouette of the giant against the morning light. It looks invincible, it looks eternal. But the men on the bridge know better. They are sailing into the history books, yes, but they are also sailing into a slaughter. The grand ambition has become a funeral procession. The fuel gauges read half full. The course is set for south, toward Okinawa, toward the fire. The bunker oil used by the Imperial Navy is thick, viscous stuff. It smells of sulfur and dead earth. As the Yamato pushes south into the East China Sea, the black smoke from its funnel lays a smudge across the grey sky, a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly back to the beast. It is the morning of April 7th, 1945. The weather is gloomy. Low clouds, intermittent rain. The sea is a slate-grey wash of whitecaps. To a sailor it looks like good cover. It looks like a place to hide. But the men on the bridge know that the clouds are deceptive. They are moving under a ceiling, but the eyes of the enemy are already watching. The Americans are not guessing anymore. They are tracking. 2 American submarines, the Threadfin and the Hackleback, have already spotted the task force. They didn't engage. They didn't fire torpedoes. They simply slipped into the shadows, matched the speed of the giant, and radioed the coordinates. latitude 31-15 north, longitude 129-14 east, course 210, speed 22 knots. The coordinates travel through the ether, bouncing off the ionosphere, landing on the decks of the American carrier fleet, Task Force 58. The trap is sprung. Aboard the Yamato, the mood shifts from anxiety to a strange, hollow acceptance. The men have finished their letters. The small wooden boxes with their hair and fingernails are stowed. They have put on fresh uniforms. It is a samurai tradition. One must be clean to meet death. Lunch is served early. Rice balls, pickled plums. It is a meal eaten standing up. No one speaks of the future. The talk is tactical, clipped. Check the pressure on the number 3 turret. Secure the loose lines. At 10 in the morning, the radar operator calls out. Blips, a few at first, then a cluster, then a wall. The screen glows with a terrifying density. It is not a patrol, it is an extermination force. 386 aircraft have launched from the American carriers. Fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers. They swarm like angry bees disturbed from a hive. They climb high, punching through the cloud layer, hunting for the wake of the battleship. On the Yamato, the alarm sounds. It is a harsh, rhythmic buzzer that cuts through the hum of the engines. General quarters. 3,000 men move at once. The watertight doors are slammed shut and spun tight. The ventilation is cut to prevent smoke from spreading. The ship seals itself. It becomes a series of steel coffins welded together. The men in the deep interior, the machinists, the stokers, the magazine crews, they will not see the sky again. They stand by their dials and levers, waiting for the sound of impact. They are the heart of the machine, but they are blind. Up on the deck, the sky begins to whine. At 12:30, the clouds break. The Americans tip their wings and dive. The first wave is calculated cruelty. The American pilots have been briefed. They know the Yamato is heavily armored. Bombs might bounce off the deck, so they change the geometry. They go for the water. They go for the torpedo. But not just any torpedo attack. They coordinate. They concentrate on the port side, the left side of the ship. If they hit both sides, the ship might settle evenly and stay afloat as a gun platform. If they hit only one side, the weight of the water will pull her over. They want to capsize the giant. The anti-aircraft guns open fire. 150 guns erupt at once. The noise is not a sound. It is a physical pressure that collapses the lungs. The famous Sanshiki shells from the main guns blast walls of flame into the air. It looks terrifying. It looks like the end of the world. But the American planes are too fast. They drop through the fire, release their payloads, and pull up. The first torpedo hits. The impact is felt by everyone. It is a sledgehammer blow to the hull. The ship shudders, a metallic groan that vibrates through the steel plates. Water, pressurized by the speed of the ship and the depth of the ocean, blasts into the breach, then another and another. The damage control reports start flowing to the bridge. Port outer engine room flooded, port hydraulic room flooded. The ship begins to list. The horizon tilts. 5 degrees, 10 degrees. On a normal ship, this is a crisis. On the Yamato, it is a math problem. The captain, Rear Admiral Aruga, looks at the inclinometer. The list is bad. The main guns cannot turn if the deck is too slanted. The ship is becoming useless. He has to level the deck, but the pumps are too slow. The water is coming in faster than they can push it out. So, a terrible order is given. Counter-flood. To balance the weight of the water on the left, they must intentionally flood the compartments on the right. But the valves are not enough. They need big spaces. They need the heavy machinery rooms. The order goes down. Flood the starboard outer engine room. There is a pause, a heartbeat of hesitation. There are men in there. Stokers, engineers, men who are currently shoveling coal and monitoring gauges to keep the ship moving. The order stands. There is no time to evacuate. If they warn them, the ship might capsize before the balance is restored. The valves are opened. Deep in the starboard hull, the water roars in. It is not a trickle, it is a river. The men in the engine room look up as the dark, oily water smashes through the intakes. The lights short out. The steam pipes burst. Hundreds of men are drowned at their posts, sacrificed to physics. The ship shudders again, settling lower, but the deck levels out. The list corrects. The guns can fire. The price of the correction is 300 souls. But the sacrifice buys only minutes. The Americans are not done. The second wave arrives. And the third. The Yamato is now a wounded animal, limping in circles. The rudder is jammed. The ship is stuck in a hard turn, leaning precariously. The speed drops. 10 knots. 5 knots. The Americans see the blood in the water. They swarm. They stop aiming for the hull and start aiming for the upper works to silence the guns. Bombs smash into the superstructure. The radar room is vaporized. The rear secondary turret is blown apart, killing the entire gun crew instantly. The decks are slick with blood and oil. The noise is a continuous rolling thunder of explosions. The anti-aircraft fire begins to slacken. The gunners are dead, or the guns are out of ammunition, or the power lines are cut. The great beehive is falling silent. Below decks, the situation is apocalyptic. The emergency lights cast a dim red glow. The air is foul with smoke and the screams of the wounded. The ship is groaning, a high-pitched metallic screeching as the structural ribs begin to fail. The list returns, worse this time. Port side again. 15 degrees, 20 degrees, furniture slides across the wardrooms. In the hospital bay, the unsecure gurneys roll into the bulkheads. The doctors try to operate on sliding floors in the dark, while the ceiling drips water. On the bridge, the officers cling to the binnacle. They know it is over. The ship is not fighting anymore. It is dying. Admiral Ito, the mission commander, stands quietly. He shakes hands with the captain. He retires to his cabin. He does not intend to leave. The captain orders the crew to abandon ship. But how do you abandon a city that is toppling over? There are no lifeboats, remember. They left them on the pier. The men must jump. But the deck is now a cliff. The port rail is underwater. The starboard rail is high in the air. Men are sliding down the wooden decking, hitting the steel fixtures, breaking bones before they even reach the water. Those who jump find themselves in a toxic sea. The fuel tanks have ruptured. The ocean is covered in a layer of heavy black oil, inches thick. It gets in the eyes, the nose, the mouth. It blinds and suffocates. And then, the final horror. The ship rolls past 90 degrees. The massive gun turrets, held in place only by gravity, slip out of their barbettes. 3,000-ton mountains of steel fall into the sea, crushing anyone in their path. The ship capsizes completely. For a moment, the red underbelly of the whale is visible. The 4 massive propellers spinning in the thin air. Then, the magazines go. The fires raging inside reach the main ammunition stores. The resulting explosion is one of the largest non-nuclear detonations in history. It is not just a bang. It is a column of fire that punches through the overcast sky, reaching 20,000 feet. The shockwave kills men swimming in the water hundreds of yards away. It pulverizes their internal organs. In Kagoshima, on the Japanese mainland, 100 miles away, villagers see the flash. They feel the tremor in the ground. They look south and see a mushroom cloud rising over the ocean. They think it is a volcano. They do not know they are watching the funeral pyre of the Imperial Navy. The ship is gone. The silence that follows is sudden and absolute. The roar of the engines, the scream of the bombs, the thunder of the guns, all replaced by the hiss of steam and the slap of waves. Debris rains down from the sky for minutes. Hot metal, pieces of wood, shredded uniforms. In the center of the oil slick, a few heads bob above the black sludge. Of the 3,332 men on board, fewer than 300 remain alive. They are choking on oil. They are burned. They are clinging to floating crates, to tatters of lumber, to each other. The American planes circle overhead. Some survivors report that the planes strafe the water, bullets kicking up sprays of oil. Others say the planes merely tipped their wings and flew away. Memory is a fractured thing in the midst of trauma, but the reality of the water is indisputable. It is cold. The sharks are coming. The survivors do not panic. They are too exhausted for panic. A strange, eerie calm settles over the group. Someone starts to sing. It is a low, raspy voice at first, cracking with smoke inhalation. Then another joins in, then another. They sing the song of the Navy, Umi Yukaba. If I go away to the sea, I shall return a corpse awash. If I go away to the mountain, I shall return a corpse in the grass. But if I die for the Emperor, It will not be a regret. The voices drift over the empty ocean. It is a dirge for themselves. They are the leftovers of a grand ambition. The unsinkable ship is a wreck on the bottom a mile down. The decisive battle was a massacre. They float in the oil, waiting for rescue or death, while the sun begins to set on the empire of Japan. The era of the battleship is over. It didn't end with a treaty. It didn't end with a retirement ceremony. It ended here. 8 minutes of fire and a pillar of smoke that looked like the end of the world. The steel has vanished. Now, only the ghosts remain. The telegrams do not arrive immediately. In the chaos of a collapsing empire, the postal service is as broken as the fleet. For weeks, families in rural villages and bombed-out cities wait. They stand by the sliding doors, watching the road, clutching the last letters written from Cure. When the notifications finally come, they are sparse, cold, official ink on cheap paper. They do not say, died in a suicide charge. They do not say, drowned in oil. They say, died a hero's death in the special attack. For many, there is not even that, just a silence that stretches into years. In a traditional Japanese funeral, the body is washed, dressed and cremated. The bones are picked from the ash by the family using chopsticks and placed in an urn. It is a ritual of closure, a physical transition from person to ancestor. But for the families of the Yamato, there are no bodies. There are no bones to pick. There is only the ocean. The Navy sends small white boxes to the bereaved. Inside, there is supposed to be the ashes of the fallen. But the boxes for the Yamato crew are light. Too light. If the family opens them, they find a slip of paper with a name, or a stone, or a distinct lack of anything at all. The government tries to turn the loss into a rallying cry. 100 million hearts beating as one. But the people are tired. They are hungry. When the war ends in August, the name Yamato, once spoken in whispers, becomes a word associated with ruin. It is buried, just like the ship. Chapter 20. Survivor's Guilt. For the 276 men who were pulled from the water, survival is not a gift, it is a sentence. They return to a Japan that is unrecognizable. The cities are ash. The Americans are occupying the streets. The emperor, the living god they were willing to die for, has renounced his divinity. The world they built their lives around has evaporated, and they are alive. In the culture of the Imperial Navy, to survive a lost ship is a complicated shame. To survive a special attack, a suicide mission, is worse. It suggests a failure of spirit, a failure to die properly. Many of the survivors hide their past. They do not tell their wives they were on the Yamato. They do not join veterans associations. They go to work in factories, in rice paddies, in offices. They rebuild Japan with their hands, but they keep their minds locked in the dark. In interviews conducted decades later, the trauma is still fresh. Old men, their hands shaking, weep not for their own suffering, but for the friends they left behind. One survivor recalls the face of a young cadet, 17 years old, singing as the ship went down. Another remembers the sound of the men trapped in the hull, banging on the steel with wrenches, a rhythmic clanging that stopped only when the water took them. They ask the question that has no answer. Why me? Why was I the one to float when better men sank? They live with the ghosts. They see the oil on their hands when they wash them. They hear the explosion in the thunder of a summer storm. They are the living vessels of a memory that Japan wants to forget. Chapter 21. From weapon to symbol. But memory is a strange thing. It shifts. It warps. As the years pass, the raw pain of the war begins to fade, replaced by a nostalgia for the spirit of the time. In the 1970s, something unexpected happens. The Yamato rises again, not from the sea, but from the television screen. A science fiction anime series and space battleship Yamato, known in the West as Star Blazers, captures the imagination of a new generation. In the story, the rusted hulk of the battleship is dug out of the dried-up ocean floor, fitted with a warp drive and launched into space to save humanity. It is a powerful metaphor. The ship that failed to save Japan in World War II is resurrected to save the entire Earth. It rewrites the ending. It turns a tragedy of waste into a saga of hope. Suddenly the Yamato is cool. It is heroic. Plastic model kits fly off the shelves. Boys who know nothing of the oil and the screaming build miniature versions of the ship in their bedrooms. They paint the chrysanthemum seal gold. They admire the sleek lines, the massive guns. The ship becomes a symbol of Japanese resilience. It becomes detached from the reality of the war. The suicide mission is romanticized as the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, stripped of its gruesome, futile context. The survivors watch this transformation with mixed feelings. They see their floating hell turned into a toy. They see the name of their grave used to sell cartoons, but they also see their fallen comrades remembered. If the children look at the Yamato with awe, perhaps the men who died on her are not entirely lost. The myth overtakes the history. The Yamato becomes a legend, like King Arthur's sword or the Trojan horse. It ceases to be a machine of war and becomes a vessel of national identity. Chapter 22. The Wreck Below. But the real Yamato is not in space. It is not a plastic model. It is lying in the dark, 1,100 feet down, at the bottom of the East China Sea. For 40 years it sits undisturbed. The currents drift past. The silt settles. The crabs scuttle across the teak decking. In the 1980s and 90s, technology finally catches up to the legend. Deep-sea submersibles, the same kind used to find the Titanics, descend into the gloom. The lights of the submersibles cut through the eternal night. And there it is. The violence of the end is preserved in rust. The ship is not intact. The explosion that tore it apart was so massive that the vessel is split in two. The bow section lies upright, severed from the rest. The main hull is upside down, a massive, brooding shape in the darkness. The imagery is haunting. The giant propellers, which once drove the ship at 27 knots, are now still encrusted with barnacles. The main guns, the pride of the Navy, have fallen out, burying their long barrels in the mud. But the detail that stops the breath of the explorers is the bow. There, on the very front of the ship, the gold chrysanthemum seal, the crest of the emperor, is still visible. It is tarnished, covered in marine growth, but it is there. It is a tombstone. Debris is scattered for miles. Boots, sake bottles, the twisted remains of anti-aircraft guns. It is a debris field of shattered ambition. The explorers do not touch it. They treat it as a grave site. They leave plaques. They offer prayers. Seeing the wreck changes the narrative again. It strips away the romance of the anime. It reminds the world that this was a violent, terrifying event. This is what happens when 65,000 tons of steel meets the laws of physics and the folly of man. It is a broken thing, a dead thing. Chapter 23. The Cost of Obedience. Looking at the wreck, we are forced to ask the hard questions. The questions that were forbidden in 1945. Was it worth it? Historians now look at Operation Tengo not as a brave sacrifice, but as a failure of leadership. The High Command knew the mission had no chance of success. They knew it would not stop the American invasion of Okinawa. They knew it would not change the outcome of the war. They sent 2,500 men to die for spirit, for aesthetics, because it would look bad if the Navy survived the war intact while the Army died in the dirt. It was a bureaucratic suicide. The letters left behind by the officers, discovered years later, reveal that they knew this too. They went not because they believed in victory, but because they believed in obedience. They were trapped in a system that valued the gesture of death more than the utility of life. The tragedy of the Yamato is not that it was sunk. Ships are sunk in war. The tragedy is that it was thrown away. It was the pinnacle of Japanese engineering, a masterpiece of naval architecture, wasted in a mission that had the strategic depth of a banzai charge. And yet, in that obedience, there is a terrifying kind of nobility. The men who sailed her did not mutiny. They did not turn back. They sailed into a storm of fire because that was their duty. It is a cautionary tale. It asks us, when does loyalty become a crime? At what point does a soldier have the right to say no? The Yamato offers no answer. It only offers silence. Chapter 24. Fire, water, silence. We are at the end of the journey. We are back at the surface. looking out over the empty ocean where the coordinates 3022 north, 12804 east mark the spot. There is nothing to see here now. The oil slick dissipated 80 years ago. The smoke has long since cleared. The screams have been swallowed by the waves. But if you listen closely to the history, you can hear the echoes. You can hear the hammering of the rivets in Kure, the sound of a nation building a dream. You can hear the whistle of the bosun's pipe, the sound of 3,000 men waking up to a day of training. You can hear the roar of the 46-centimeter guns shaking the sky, and you can hear the silence of the aftermath. The story of the Yamato is the story of the 20th century. It is the story of the machine age where we built monsters we could not control. It is the story of the transition from the old world of knights and duels to the new world of radar and algorithms. Yamato was the perfect ship for the past. It was the ultimate samurai sword. But the enemy had brought a gun. In the end, the ship did exactly what it was designed to do. It carried the weight of the nation. It absorbed the blows. It fought until it could not fight anymore. It lies there now in the cold and the dark, a monument to a vanished empire. 2,500 men sleep within its iron walls. They are the crew of the Eternal Watch. They are the guardians of the grand ambition. We leave them there, in the fire of memory and the water of the deep. This is the story of the Yamato, the ship that was too big for the world. Goodbye.